Okay, happy Hanukkah, everybody. I'm reading about the latest massacre in San Bernardino, which initially they wanted to dismiss as some type of gun control issue. Can you tell them to... or some begruntled workers, and then it turned out to be Islamic radicals. You know, it just brought to the surface one of the deepest problems of what we're dealing with today. And that is beyond the actual massacres of innocent people and killings of innocent people, literally on a daily basis in Israel. A day doesn't pass and there isn't some attempted murder. Thank God many of them are not successful, but it doesn't matter. They are attempting it. And then the attacks in Paris and now in California. And then you put into the equation everything that took place the last 15 years, you could say, starting with September 11th in the United States. You see that besides the actual attacks is there's no appalling is the word I would use, pathetic, the response. We see an unbelievable void in leadership. I mean, there's no response. The most we could say is talk about gun control, trying to bomb ISIS. I mean, it's very clearly a pattern of Islamic radicalism. And it's very clear Islamic, specifically Islamic, it's not Christian, and it's not Jewish, and it's not Buddhist, and it's not atheist. It's in the name of religion. This doesn't mean that every Muslim is a terrorist, but it's definitely coming from that place. And there's a certain sympathy. And what you hear more about is Islamophobia than about understanding that there is an enemy that can strike and is striking wherever and which they wish. Now, I'm not sure what needs to happen to wake people up in our governments. I mean, do we need to have a massacre, God forbid, of hundreds of thousands of people, and then someone will say, oh, you know, time to realize. There's no question, I've written about this a number of times back already from September 11th. This is, in my opinion, the level of a World War III. It's only not a world war with particular boundaries and countries. It's a war against the Western lifestyle led by religious people. And their so-called Muslims who are not radicals are not doing enough to quiet them and definitely to control with all the excuses. And most importantly, what's so glaring about it is the lack of leadership. I mean, you know what a leader does in times of crisis? They first of all convey and exude a certain confidence. And they build courage and clarity and develop a smart strategy, and you feel like you're behind the winner. You're behind the commander-in-chief who leads us to a certain victory. That's what leaders do. Not in this country and not in any country I've seen, in Europe as well, do we have that type of leader. Which tells you either the leaders are just not leaders, and more importantly, they don't understand at all what's going on. I was talking to a very intelligent guy last week about this whole issue. So he said to me, listen, get back to me on Tuesday because Sunday there's football games and Monday night is football, and Tuesday we can talk about this. This is what America wants to do. It wants to go back to its football games. And I understand. Of course, we want to have our peaceful lifestyle, and we're not looking to panic, and I'm not suggesting we do. But the fact of the matter, there is a cancer that is right now breeding, and it's a new type of war. It's ideological, it's religious, and it's not about boundaries. And it's not particularly with armies. But it's a war. And I have to speak out because to me it's very clear, and not to speak out is a crime. So even if no one's listening, someone has to go down for the record to say that there's a war, a real war. And it's a completely new war. We've never fought such a war. It's not, as I said, with a particular army. It's not ISIS. It's a group it's probably millions of people strong, and with a sympathy coming from religious circles. Not all Christians in the 15th century and 16th century were crusaders. They weren't all murdering people. But it was coming from Christianity, and Christianity had to be tamed. Simple as that. And this whole type of defensiveness that we can't say anything about Muslims, I'm not a pro-Trump guy, and I'm not suggesting what he said is the right thing to do. But this type of defense that were more important to protect religious freedoms, of course protect religious freedoms. But there is a Muslim uprising starting in the Middle East that's spreading, and the radicals are dominating. 100 million Germans participated in the Holocaust. Not every one of them gassed Jews or cremated them, but every one of them in some silent way participated because they allowed it to happen in their country. And we have to see it as such. That's how it works. If in the United States there'd be a genocide of Muslims even, we all are responsible. You wouldn't just say a few people in the government or a few radicals did it. We're responsible because it happened on our watch. And that's ridiculous to not talk about this openly and straightforwardly. We learned enough from what happened 70 years ago, where the silent Europeans and the silent Germans, we didn't know, etc., etc. And everybody, this one was taking orders, and this one didn't know. So I think, firstly, I speak as a Jew, and I speak as a citizen of the world, and a citizen of the United States. We're lacking tremendous, complete lack of leadership that I think will go down in biblical proportions of how no one has risen to the occasion. You tell me, have you heard anyone speak up in a way that you feel, this is a person I would go to war with because I feel confident, I feel strong? And a leader achieves number one, clarity, and number two, fortitude to forge ahead, and you come up with a strategy. I don't know what Obama is going to do. He's out of office soon. I don't know if anyone coming, the next president, will know better what to do. But clearly that everyone is living in a real denial. And it's for obvious reasons, as I've written many times, because no one wants to deal with a religious war. Religious wars are supposed to be something from 300 centuries ago. No one in this scientific world ever expected there would be a religious war in the 21st century. And that's number one. So no one wants to deal with that, and therefore as soon as you're denying that that's the war, you're already losing. So you can have, even if a small group of people with passionate beliefs who really believe that they're the chosen people by God, the Muslims, who bring godliness to the world. They don't think they're killing people. They think they're destroying the evil so that God can dominate in this world. That's how they think. What's our response to that? You don't hear any response to that. Nobody wants to talk in the name of God. Nobody wants to talk in the name of Abraham. Now, all this came to my mind. Well, not just now. I'm just right now venting, but more than venting. This is not a tantrum. It's quite deliberate, and but it all came to mind because I was thinking about Hanukkah. Hanukkah is menorahs are being lit all over, also in public displays. We saw some vandalism in the Upper East Side, toppling a menorah. So right there, here in New York, still see anti-Semitism taking place. And I was thinking about the message of Hanukkah. Hanukkah was a war. It was a war. But there's something extremely fascinating about this war of Hanukkah. There was a war of the Greeks, the Greco-Syrians, who were living at that time. For some reason or other, like everybody felt, they felt the Jews in Jerusalem as a threat to them, and they decided to ransack Jerusalem. And that's what they did. They attacked the temple. They desecrated it. Now, these were people who were considered to be enlightened. The Greek, the enlightened Greek. There were Jews actually who were Misyavnim, similar to the Enlightenment in the 17th, 18th century, who supported them. Now, they were not looking to kill Jews, by the way. They were looking to destroy the spirit behind Jewish belief. We say it in the Hanukkah prayer, we say that they wanted to erase and forget Torah Secha. That is Torah, they had no problem with Torah. Torah as a doctrine of morality, of ethics, of inspiration, of poetry, of philosophy. But why is it Torah Secha? Why are you calling it holy, the holy Torah? Your God's Torah. They didn't want the holy. What do you need holy for? And the same thing, they had no problem with mitzvot that again are ethical, moral, kind, virtue, justice. But why are you calling it God's mitzvahs? And we insist to call it God's mitzvahs. That's what they challenged. So they went and ransacked the temple. They desecrated it because that was the symbol of the holy place where God rests. And they defiled the holiest place on earth, which is the Temple Mount, where the battles still rage today. Basically, 3,000 and... how many years ago would this be? It was around 135 BC. So we're talking about 3,200 years ago, probably. No, 2,200 years ago, I'm sorry. 2,400 years ago. Okay. And then the Maccabees, which is a small group of a Jewish army, defied them, went to war, and like it said, they won the battle. It says the few, the chazokim biyad ma'at, biyad chaloshim, the strong were defeated by the weak, and the many were defeated by the few, because they went with a passion, a belief, and they won the war. That's what happened. As a result of them winning the war, they went back into the temple, and they began to clean it up after the mess that they destroyed. Not just a physical mess, we're talking about a spiritual mess. They defiled. It was a holy temple. For example, the menorah had to be lit with pure olive oil, a sign of purity. They said, what do you need pure olive oil? Olive oil is enough. So they couldn't find any pure olive oil to lit the menorah. And here was the miracle. They found one crucible, one little flask of oil that should have burned only one night. Instead, it burned for 8 nights. And that became the miracle of Hanukkah. And that's why we light a menorah for 8 days, 8 nights, to commemorate that miracle that happened there. So the obvious question that's asked, one second, the main focus of Hanukkah was a war. And the war was won. Had the war not been won, had the war not been won, we wouldn't have been able to rededicate the temple. By the way, Hanukkah means to dedicate. Hanukkah means chanech, to rededicate the temple, which they did, and to rededicate the menorah. That was incidental. Because they won the war, now they can go ahead and take control over the temple and rededicate it and rekindle the menorah, etc. Why do we take, so to speak, the effect of the victory, which is the lighting of the menorah, and make that the central theme of Hanukkah? My Hanukkah, what's Hanukkah? The miracle of finding the oil. And if you look in the Talmud, you almost don't even, no mention is even made about the war. And we rarely refer to it. You don't even, when we light the Hanukkah menorah, we don't talk about a battle. In Al Nisim, when we say, not Al Nisim, in the prayer that we say, in the Hanukkah prayer, we say in the prayer, there we make mention of the battle, as I said, that the strong were conquered by the weak, etc. So that's the question that's asked in Hasidic thought, and it came to mind because it's so critical. Actually, the exact answer to this question will teach you about the battles we're fighting today. Because here too, what kind of battle are we fighting today? Now let's remember that in warfare, the most important thing in warfare is more than just strong armies. It's intelligence. You'll always see warfare comes with intelligence. You have to know where the enemy is, where their weak points are, understand things behind enemy lines, understand the decoys and all the other things. That's why there's so much deception and decoy in war, because each side wants to fool the other. So how much part of the war is psychological? Warfare is far more psychological than it is physical. Now, obviously, you need to have strong armies and weapons and so on and strategy. But if you don't have your psychological warfare in place, you can have the strongest army and it will never win. Case in point, we all know about the Vietnam War. Now, tell me, the Viet Cong compared to the American army, is it would you even think that there'd be a match? You're talking about one of the most powerful army in history, with the most sophisticated weapons. But forget about the numbers. The numbers simply a mere military, the number of military. With all that, what Viet Cong fought with bamboos and machetes and knives. I mean, you're talking about guerrilla warfare of one of the smallest countries and poorest countries in the world. North Vietnam. North Vietnam pitted against the United States. If someone told you that this was a battle, what would you think? You'd think that within a few weeks, not even a few weeks, in a few days, you basically flattened the whole Vietnam, a country like the United States, with the atom bomb and with all the weaponry, even if you don't use it all. Now, what happened in Vietnam exactly? Officially, what happened was the whole of America was behind the war. It was based on a policy called the domino effect, that after World War II, so even though the Allies, Soviet Union, Stalin was an ally with FDR in the United States, but it was only an ally because we were united by one common enemy, the Nazis, the Axis, the Nazis and the Japanese. But once the war was over, Stalin became a formidable enemy of the United States and began conquering half of Europe. That's why you had West Berlin, West Germany, East Germany, until the Berlin Wall was ripped down in the 1989, what is it, 1989, 1990, something like that, a little earlier. Okay, So what happened? The Soviet Union, in its communist revolution, was slowly spreading in many different places in the world, especially Eastern Europe, but also in Southeast Asia. And South Vietnam was democratic, South Vietnam was aligned with the United States, and North Vietnam was being conquered, just like North Korea. So the policy was, as you could probably all remember, or no, I don't remember myself, in the 50s there was the McCarthy era, where it was this mania and phobia against communism, and the cleansing of the communists in the Senate and in Hollywood. You know, it was a what was it called? A era of a terror reign for a few years, and the United States, communism was the worst possible thing. So in that climate, the United States felt that it has to take a stand in Southeast Asia, and that if you don't stop the communists from spreading, a line in the sand was drawn in North Vietnam. And that's why America entered the war, and everybody in the United States supported it in the late 50s. The war really began the beginning of the 60s. There was also, you may know, the Cuban Missile Crisis. So this all fed the need to protect us from the communists, because now the communist Cuba, Fidel Castro came into power in the late mid-50s, and Cuba became another communist satellite, and that was just a few hundred, 100 miles from Florida, or even less. And this became, so the climate was that we have to protect against the Soviet expansion. And North Vietnam became the symbol. It's called the domino effect, that if we don't stop them there, the next thing is South Vietnam, the next thing is the rest of Southeast Asia, and basically that whole region would become communist. So, you know, a logical argument, fine. And whoever thought the United States cannot handle North Vietnam? But it turned out to be all false, in the sense that America really was not behind this war. And ultimately, in the mid-60s, the tide turned, and the protests began, and Johnson couldn't even get re-elected, and he didn't submit to re-elect himself, even though he was a popular president. In the social area, he was one of the ones that created a revolution in civil rights after Kennedy was killed, assassinated, and he could not get re-elected. The tide turned, and if you know what happened was that we did not win the war. Now, how in the world did a country like ours become humbled in a place like that? Because when you don't have a cause that you believe in, and the soldiers don't know why they're fighting, and they don't even know if they can win, and they don't even know what victory means. At some point, no one knew why we were in Vietnam. Even what I just said, many people say, oh, I didn't know it was to stop communism. It's a good question. Why were we in Vietnam? And then it became a point where the cause no longer was relevant. Nobody cared. So how could you win a war? The Viet Cong were fighting for their little land. It was my little farm, my little paddy, my little bamboo patch. And they were fighting for, this was their life. And when someone fights for what they care about, and you may have the biggest army and you don't care, there's no way you can win such a war. Because what, are you going to just bomb them? It's just going to be more firepower. This means a psychological loss. When you're psychologically lost a war, as Sun Tzu writes in The Art of War, wars are not won in the battlefield. Wars are won before you even begin fighting. If you don't have it in you, the belief and the absolute certainty, and yes, and the moral higher ground, that your cause is just, you've already lost your war. You'll never be able, because war is painful, it's bloody, and there better be a very good reason why you're fighting. It has to be that your cause is worth the blood. Because as soon as you see blood, as soon as there's pain, as soon as there's death, if you don't really have a cause, why would you stay there? And that's what happened. Vietnam became too much. We couldn't handle it. Well, because the cause was not strong enough, or there was no cause at all, and no one even knew what was fighting for, and whether we could even win. So there you have a case in point. Here we have a situation which is very similar. These Muslims that are attacking are very passionate. They're ready to die. Not only they're ready to die, they do die. You have to understand, these are not people who are psychotic, or who want to commit suicide, or who are taking meds and going to therapy. They're dying for a cause. They believe in this religious cause. As crazy as it sounds, they believe in it. And they're ready to die for it. How do you fight such a war? I don't know if you remember The Heart of Darkness by Richard, who wrote The Heart of Darkness? Richard Kahn. It later was made into a movie, Apocalypse Now, Vietnam. And it was about the darkness, the heart of darkness. You know how insane the war was. And there comes a point there where one of the Colonel Kurtz, who defies the American government, even though he went in as a sergeant and was a brilliant soldier, but he realized how insane it was. So he says a line there. He says, I realized how this war can never be lost, because this is what happened. We were sent by the army, the U.S. Army, into a city to inoculate children against disease, because during war, disease spreads. And so they inoculated the children. The children, the South Vietnamese, protect them from disease. He says, we came back half hour later to the town. You know what we saw? I don't want to say this, it's a little gory, so I apologize if this is, they said we saw a pile of little arms cut off in the middle of the town. The Viet Cong came and they cut off the arms that we inoculated. So these children were now had one arm. They didn't, that's what they did because of our inoculation. And that's when he says, I realized at that point, we can never win this war. Because if they're ready to do that, they're ready to cut off arms of little children. You know, how could we? You give me, he says, you give me 2 battalions of such passionate people, and I'll have this war won in 2 weeks. Now, it's insane what they did. It's horrible what they did. But once you see someone's ready to do that, you know you better have the guts and the gall and the courage to fight such a war, or else get out. And we have exactly the situation right now. If we don't have the moral high ground, and the reason, we will lose this war, and at terrible cost. And unfortunately, that's exactly what's happening now. So I go back to Hanukkah. Hanukkah, we don't honor and remember the battle even. Why? Because the battle was just technical. It was ideological. What was the battle of the Maccabees and the Greeks? The Greeks wanted to erase the spiritual and divine center of Jewish life. No problem. Stick to it as a moral system, as a human, man-made system. Don't make it divine. Don't call it holy. Stop calling it sanctifying your life. It has nothing to do with God. That's what they wanted. And that's what they came to desecrate and defile. So the miracle was not about winning a battle. The miracle was about, does the spiritual vision of the Jewish people, will it prevail? Or will this powerful Syrian Greco army, which was far more powerful, like I said, Giborim, Chazokim, they were stronger, they were more powerful, they were more in number and quantity and quality stronger than the Jewish army. And that was so the battle was not about territory. It wasn't about property. It wasn't about money. It was ideology. So what best way to celebrate ideology, a victory of ideology, is not to go around and make a parade and where we show off our arms and our soldiers and our tanks and our military. The best way is you light a candle. Because a flame, a pure flame, represents spirit. For us, flames represent spirit. So how do we honor this? We honor it not by a military victory, it was a spiritual victory. And that reminded me exactly what we're dealing with now. We're not dealing with a regular war. World War II, World War I, even though there was ideology there, but it was a real war. The enemy was right across the border. You know what they wanted, and that was that. You had to really be more powerful. Today you have to be much more psychologically powerful. So Hanukkah actually teaches us lessons of exactly what battle we're fighting today. We're not fighting a battle of arms, because we definitely have more arms than ISIS and Al-Qaeda and Hezbollah and Hamas and all the other names, which I don't even know every denomination that exists. It doesn't matter. We're fighting an ideological battle. Both Israel, the United States, the Western world has not come to terms with that. Has not come to terms. Basically, and you see from the battles that are fought, no battle has been won yet in the last 30 years. Last summer, there was a fight in Gaza, and Israel bombed Hamas and bombed Gaza. Was the war won? No. They're building tunnels right now. We all know, God forbid, what could happen in a short while. What wars was fought? What won? Al-Qaeda may have been erased. Bin Laden was killed. Was the war won? No. Islamic radicalism marches on. It can attack wherever it wants at its own whims. We have not won any battle. The schools in the Muslim world continue to teach that the Western world is decadent, anti-God, and everything, and has to be destroyed. Now, some don't teach it in radical ways, But many do teach that radical violence is acceptable. Some will say jihad is a conceptual thing. Others say jihad means literal war. So comes Hanukkah, timing couldn't be better. What does Hanukkah teach? That the battle has nothing to do with arms. It's nothing to do with guns. It's to do with light. Will light prevail? The light of a spiritual approach to life that instead of killing people that you think are decadent or infidels, inspire them. As I mentioned a number of times, in the house of Abraham, these battles were fought. And ultimately, Abraham taught that the way to deal with so-called spiritual enemies or people who ideologically don't agree with you is not to kill them. It's to teach them. Light. How do we fight darkness? The Muslims should learn from Hanukkah. Instead of fighting darkness by killing, by shooting innocent people, by attacking stadiums or nightclubs or daycare centers, or whatever that center was in San Bernardino, which was a social center for people, for the needy. Instead of doing that, why don't you bring light? A little light dispels darkness. That's what we Jews can tell the world today. Hanukkah is the lesson of what this war is all about. And until we don't embrace light with more passion than they embrace their darkness, they will unfortunately win. That's a simple fact as that. So obviously this doesn't mean that we don't have to have a strong military and we need the right deterrence and we need to protect ourselves. But at the end of the day, how much can police and armies really do with a thief or a murderer? You could put them behind bars, you can stop them from acting, but you have to change them. Transformation comes from rehabilitating, not just stopping the criminal, but making sure the criminal doesn't come attack you in the first place. And that's a far greater achievement, and that's what we need to accomplish here. Because we could put out fires. Look, for every terrorist attack in Israel, most cases the terrorists get killed. So some of us think, at some point they'll all be killed. It's not that simple. First of all, the numbers are quite large. And number two, you haven't done anything. You just killed the person wielding the knife or the gun. You haven't resolved the problem. The resolving of the problem is going to be in the school systems, in their homes, and what is being taught. And until we don't demand, both the Muslim world, because what I would do if I were the president or any leader, I would demand from the Muslim world, no, we don't believe that you're murderers. But why don't you join us in declaring in every mosque, in every school, in every community, these are the standards that God wants us to behave and live up to when we're dealing with the decadent Western world. You're not going to find them doing that because they are sympathetic to the cause. They may not agree with the methods, but they're sympathetic to the cause. So we don't have our leaders even doing that. It's all about, don't attack Muslims, Islamophobia. No, why don't we demand from the Muslims, just like we should demand from the Christians and from the Jews? Why don't we all demand that there's a certain standard and tell us what that standard is? That type of vision has been lost, unfortunately. And I speak as an optimist. I'm not a pessimist. I don't feel it's over. I feel that there's absolutely enough people that could get it. But I think it's our obligation and as Jews and as people who've seen history to take the Hanukkah message, and absolutely we can do a lot about what's going on today. But it's so painful to see. Besides the loss and the pain, we all know that's terrible. But beyond that, what's the response? Here, 14. How many people were killed last week there? 17 people? 14 people and 21 wounded? Something like that. 14 people ripped away from their families forever. It's the United States of America. What is the response of that? Can you tell me a response? I know President Obama gave a press conference and he declared war. But we all know what it sounded like when you hear it. You know when someone is going for it. I see Americans going into denial. We feel very helpless and essentially confused when we think about it. But we have, of course, our video games and we have our football games. And we're smack in the middle of the football season. The playoffs are coming in a few weeks. So people have what to look forward to. And all this really doesn't matter to most people, to be honest, until it hits home. But the wise people don't wait till it hits home. We have to talk about it, and that's why I'm talking about it. So the United States, I don't know what's going to happen. This country is right now busy with, as I said, one of the Oscars, and there's the Grammys, and there's the playoffs, and there's the Super Bowl, and then, of course, comes the baseball season in April. So we have it covered, right? I don't think we need, we have our iPhones, and we have our gadgets, and we have our parties. Christmas is coming. There's a lot to do. So we live in a country that is, on one hand, a great blessing that we have this leisure. but we're not. But at the same time, we're really not ready for battles of this nature, and that's why I think the reaction is so timid and so tepid, for that matter, because we're not. America doesn't have the stomach for this. But there are, we're looking for. I'd like to believe there's a leader that's going to understand what has to be done. Now, this doesn't mean that all of America should suddenly shut down all its systems and just get to go to war. That's not what I'm talking about. You need someone who understands the vision of the clash of civilizations that we're into now. And it absolutely is a Hanukkah type of war. One far more about ideology, light and darkness, than about armies. And we see that. What did it take them to blow down, to knock down the Twin Towers? They didn't need any armies. They just needed 10 people to hijack planes, use the Western free system of travel and so on against us, and they broke down the two big symbols of what's called commercial materialism of the United States. Now I understand you say what kind of dent did it make in our economy? Maybe it made no dent, but the bottom line is some 2,000 plus people were killed. It could have been a lot worse. Thank God it wasn't. That's number one. Number two, it's not ending. It's not like it's over after this. So I think Hanukkah has tremendous lessons to teach us about this whole battle of light. And until we carry the flag, the banner of light, that we are here to bring light into the world. And we are able to talk godly language and say, this is what God wants of us. Until we speak in that type of language, we will not have the moral certitude and the courage and the gall to be able to fight a battle like this. And sadly, I don't see it, not in Europe, not in the United States, not in Israel. Nobody yet has that. The only one that seems to have guts so far is President Putin. And whether you like him or not, but he's the only one that has guts. It began as a joke, but the more I think about it, the more I think that if he was put in charge in Israel, I think within 6 months to 12 months you have all our problems solved. And then I'd move into the United States and we'd have the problem solved here. But then Russia, of course, would crumble probably in his absence. Now, trust me, I'm not suggesting that he's a guy that you could just trust, but he's a tough guy. And doesn't waffle, and he's the only one that seems to be that has spine. And you have to respect that. Again, he happened to be good to Jews too, because he's smart. Why fight with the Jews? Had Stalin and Hitler not fought with the Jews, they could have gotten their objectives met. The Jews were never their enemies. What did the Jews do to them? The Jews weren't looking to take power. Okay, fine, this is basic, the rabid anti-Semitism. Now, Putin is smarter than that. He realizes being friendly to the Jews is only in his service. Jews are smart, they have money, and why does he have to fight with them? As long as they're not stopping his objectives. So, I'm not here to talk about, I'm not a pro-Putin guy per se, so I hope nobody gets that message. I'm just looking in the void of leadership. He's the only one that seems to have something in mind. He wants to bring Soviet Union back to its great supremacy, Russia. Fine, he's entitled as a leader of that country, and he's behaving in ways that some people may not like. But you know something? What's our alternative? On the other end, we have a lot of mediocrity, weakness, no statements, no leadership. I remember when Reagan became president, he was vilified. He was hated by the left. Today, he became more popular with everybody. Reagan. Now Bush is the one they attack. But Reagan was hated. I remember Reagan. They used to talk about Reagan in the worst possible way. But then they saw the Soviet Union collapsed. So many people didn't want to give him credit. They say it happened to happen under his watch. Something? Even if there are events that happened before his presidency, the fact of the matter, when something happens under the watch of a president, they usually give credit to the president. You could also say Lincoln was not really him. It was things that happened before Lincoln was around. But that's how it works. Now, Reagan, in his own way, had a certain certitude that you hear any speech he gave, he made America feel proud. He made Americans feel certain about our cause. He labeled the Soviet Union an evil empire. Gorbachev, tear that wall down. All these lines, you could dismiss it as Hollywood, which was where he came from, but he made America feel strong. And frankly, you know something? A commander-in-chief is not just someone who knows military strategy. He knows how to rally the troops. Because many wars have been lost with great strategy, but the leader could not inspire his men and women. And on the other hand, there are many wars that were won, even though the strategy wasn't so good. And he didn't necessarily even have a superior army, but the soldiers felt they could win. And everybody knows this. You see it in sports. You see it in schools. You see that type of the leaders that know how to get people riled up, feel confident. And you find many stories how commanders in chief and other generals in different armies and soldiers knew they were losing the war. And yet they spoke to their soldiers as if we were winning, and that changed the tide. You know, it's all in the head. If you don't think you can win, it doesn't matter how powerful you are. If you think you can win, it doesn't matter how weak you are. Now, obviously, you need both together. I'm not suggesting that one man can stand up to everything. But the fact of the matter, there are individuals that did stand up. David and Goliath, you hear the stories. You know, it's all in the mind. I was just reading a story that I don't know if you ever see how elephants who are in captivity, like in circuses and so on. So an elephant is a pretty powerful animal. If it goes in a stampede, it's pretty dangerous. And lions and other mighty animals get out of its way. And yet you see that you can go into any circus, you see that you lead an elephant by a rope, and the elephant just goes along. So someone was asked, why this elephant doesn't, the rope means nothing. This is not a horse, it's not a small animal. An elephant, the elephant wants to go the other direction, the rope, you're not going to be able to pull him your way. So why does the elephant just follow the rope? So they said because these elephants were born in captivity, and when they were babies, the rope was tied around them, and then you could control them because they were very small. So psychologically, the elephant never changed its attitude. It thinks, like that baby elephant, that you really control it, when really, in fact, it doesn't. You don't control it at all. So it just goes along with the rope because that's what it remembers as a child. So just as an example, it's all in the head. If you think you're weak, you become weak. We actually have this concept of projection in the chapter about the Meraglim, the scouts that Moses sent to check out Israel. They came back with this terrible report that it's a land that consumes its inhabitants. It's powerful giants. We cannot fight them. And there's an expression, a strange expression that it says that the Meraglim, the scouts said, "V'hayinu b'eineihem kechagovim, v'chein hayinu b'eineihem." B'eineihem. Yeah, we saw ourselves as grasshoppers, as insects, compared to them, and that's how we appeared to them. So the question is asked, what do you mean? It's an objective reality. They were, let's say, 10 feet tall, you're 5 feet tall, so you're half their size. So it says, no, because we saw ourselves that way, that's how they saw us. When you see yourself like an insect, then everybody looks at you that way as well. Now think about this psychologically. It's something very hard for us to imagine. How do other people see you? When you meet someone, do you exude confidence? And they feel, oh, you know, this is a person I want to be around? Or do you exude weakness, low self-esteem, and unsure of yourself, uncertain? It's very hard. Most of us don't want to imagine that's what we exude. And most of our friends will not tell us, because why they want to insult us. But think about it for a moment. When you meet someone, what do they think about you? You know? Now, remember, arrogance should not be confused with self-confidence. You know, a lot of people, they say, is that they hide their ignorance with their arrogance. They hide their lack of self-confidence with their arrogance. So let's not talk about arrogance. But the fact of the matter is, you all know, there are people that when you're in their presence, you feel nurtured. You feel secure. You feel you will be taken care of. It's like, you know, being in the hands of a master. Someone who's really mastered an art or a certain skill. When you're around them, you just feel it. And you know, this is a person I can trust. And that's just what it is. That's what a leader is in each particular circle. You feel it. And of course, you feel the opposite as well. When someone's not that way, it's also very clear that they just don't give that to you. So when you had people like Reagan, I'm not talking about now his executive skills and his political knowledge and his economic aptitude, who knows? You know, he definitely, someone's elected twice, 8 years, is not a fool. So I would give him more credit than just to dismiss him as some type of lucky guy that happened to get himself elected as President of the United States. You know, he was also as governor of California, etc. But regardless of his IQ and his brilliance in, let's say, in war strategy, but he did rile the troops up. There's no question about it. When he spoke, America listened. And if you hear his talks, you could hear them recorded today. There was no question. You know, when he said, the sun is rise, it's sunrise in America again, every American felt it. He was a great speaker. And, you know, lahavdil, I should say, in a most obscene way. Hitler was also that same way. He was able, in his speeches and his passion, in his demonic passion, and you could see it. I studied his talks. You see the demonic hypnotism of his talks. He was able to take 100 million Germans and become the fatherland, and he became the Führer, the father. The Führer is the leader, and was worshipped as such. That's the power of leadership. So leadership can go two ways. You can have a leader that's leading people to hell, but there's a leader. Hitler was a leader. Now, it's not his credit. I'm just saying he had that power. That's the power of a leader. And then when a leader leads you to, in a positive way, they could change the world. We don't have such leaders today. I don't think I need to prove it. Just ask people how you feel about your president, about your governor, about your mayor, about hundreds of other. And sadly, I don't see it anywhere. I remember throughout my lifetime, at least, there were in some countries you had someone was somewhat of a voice. In the days of Reagan, there was Margaret Thatcher, in the Iron Woman, they called her, in England, and she had a similar idea. You read about Churchill during World War II, even though afterwards he fell from favor. So you had those leaders that rose, and it could be FDR as well, and of course we read about Lincoln and about Washington and so on. We need a leader like that today. It could very well be also the political process is destroying such leaders. Who wants to be a leader when all you have to do is raise money, pander, and constantly lick up to everybody? So it could very well be that the whole system is really weeding out anyone that's quality. You have to be somewhat of a maneuverer and be very ambitious. It's not about, having vision. I don't think the presidents of the United States in the last few elections were elected because of their vision. I don't care what they say. They have all their lines. We all know they get up, it's a line. It's based on the polls or something like that. So it's sad to see. It's sad to see that in Israel and other places of the world you don't really have that. That's why I go back to Hanukkah. I speak now as an American citizen and as a Jew. We have in Hanukkah tremendous lessons of dealing with times like this. Number one, going back to what I said before, the idea that it's a battle of light ideology. It's a battle of religious beliefs. Very much like the founding of this country. This founding of this country was not based on economic freedom. It was not based on commercialism and on capitalism. It was based on the idea, do human beings have rights? If you read the Declaration of Independence, fascinating document where the founding fathers basically, in almost an apologetic way, apologize to King George and say, there comes a point where we are being overtaxed and not allowed to control our destiny, and that time has come to sever our ties with Mother England, or whatever they call it, and basically to establish a country with independence that's built on what? All men are created equal and have inalienable rights. This was a revolutionary document, the first time that an institutionalized government, embraced freedom of individual rights. It did not exist before that. We had the Magna Carta, we had different documents, statements. The only ones that really embrace this is the Bible. The Torah says every human being is created in the divine image, and everybody has rights. There's no such thing as a monarch or a king or a rabbi or Moses that can control your life. God created the world. Each of us is God's creature, and there are rules of what God expects of us. So this became an institution, a government in the United States, and these principles have spread. And that's really the core beliefs of this country. You don't even hear that being stated by our leaders. They're not even talking about, don't quote the Bible. Don't quote religious ideas. Just quote your own Declaration of Independence. What's happening? When innocent people are killed, what's the worst crime of all besides the death? Is the abuse, the violation of their individual right to live as they see fit. And you can't come and impose your will on them. That's the whole point. So this attack of the whole Islam radicalism is an attack on the basis of our Declaration of Independence, which is frankly based on the Torah. I've mentioned many times, the excellent book by Michael Novak, On Two Wings, where he makes a case how the principles of this country are based on Torah metaphysics. So it's a violation of the foundation of this country, which we Jews have benefited from, and every people have benefited, that it became a haven, a melting pot, that everyone's welcome to these shores. As long as you're a law-abiding citizen, you can practice or not practice as you see fit. Many have pointed out that it's only the right of this, that only the religion, that statement that all men are created equal, that gives a right to someone to even be an atheist. Would atheists have accorded that right to believers? I don't think so. The fact that God created also all is equal means that you have a right to be a non-believer in God. That's the extent of this belief. And even if I don't like what you're saying, I cannot silence you. And I cannot tell you how to practice or not practice. So when we see this attack, it's not just an attack on our way of life, it's an attack on our ideology. So that's lesson number one from Hanukkah. It's not a military war, it's an ideological one. And not Muslims and not Christians and not Jews can dictate to others how to live their lives. And definitely not through violence and murder, which is exactly what's happening. That's number one. So number one, that clarity. It's a clarity. And if you think of light, Hanukkah light, that's exactly what light does. What is light versus darkness? If you shut the lights in this room, what happens in this room? Nothing changes. When you turn on the light, nothing changes. The chairs are the chairs, the people are the people, the walls are the walls. The only thing that changes is you can see everything in its right place. So Hanukkah, next message is clarity. Understanding exactly what we're dealing with here. What is the clarity? That's what intelligence does. Intelligence doesn't just tell you there's an enemy. It tells you what the enemy wants. Where are its strong points? Where are its weak points? How can you find behind enemy lines supporters that will support your cause to undermine the enemy? It's understanding your enemy. And frankly, we've failed completely. Who understands the Islamic radical enemy? I don't think very many people. We basically say, don't kill us, but we don't have no idea what's going on in their minds. When we do finally capture them, so the intelligence does is torture them to try to get our information to stop further attacks. But to understand their mentality, to understand what makes them tick, so we can know, can you do something about it? What's being taught in their schools? Does anyone know, for example, have you ever listened to translations of the speeches of their imams in mosques every Friday? This is their so-called rabbis, their authorities, what they're saying to their men, women, and children. They give a speech, a sermon every Friday. Does anyone know what is said during those sermons? Listen to them and you'll know right away what these people are being fed. Across the board, in Israel, in, of course, the Arabian countries, the Muslim countries, and anywhere there's a mosque, right here. The mosques here in the Upper West Side and the mosques in Atlantic Avenue and on Ocean Park and on Coney Island Avenue. Just listen, get it translated, and you tell me. You'll hear everything right there. They're preaching. They're telling them things, and they're not just telling them to be charitable and to bring guests into their homes. Trust me. I don't understand Arabic, but I've read the translations because I wanted to know what is the enemy. Why don't we even try to find out? I find that to be like unbelievable negligence. At least understand what does the enemy want. You don't hear it, and even those that know it probably are silenced because it'll come across as being challenging Islamic philosophy. Yeah, you know something? If they're being taught that based on the Quran and Islamic thought, certain things that are threatening us, we should be aware of that. You're not going to find an expose in the New York Times that's going to tell you what's going on in Islamic minds. New York Times is a good newspaper, but that's where they stop. They don't go there. Now, that's number two. So Hanukkah, number one, is that it's ideological. Number two, the clarity that light provides. Number three is the power of light over darkness. When you have clarity, you immediately become more powerful. When you're confused, as I said earlier, you can have every weapon in your arsenal, but if the enemy confuses you, you're lost. You're dead duck. Even though the enemy may have no weapons, because you're confused, you don't know what to do. So Hanukkah teaches us that when you are armed with light, light ultimately dispels every form of darkness. Now, what exactly is light? Light, as I mentioned before, relates to the soul. The soul of the human being is the flame of God. Ner mitzvah v'torah are. Studying Torah, doing a mitzvah is light. What does light mean? Light is spiritual fortitude. That's what light is. Having a focus, something you believe in. When you believe in something powerfully, let's say you believe in the concept of being a virtuous person even though everyone around you is corrupt, that's light. You will rise. Because that's just like the lesson of oil. Oil rises in any liquid. You mix oil with water, the oil will rise to the top. The same thing is with clarity. When you have a room of, let's say, 100 people, 10 people, and 9 people are confused, and one is clear, you tell me the clear one is like the oil that will rise, because clarity has that element of eminence and superiority. So even if you have 9 people who have all the money in the world, have all the weapons at their disposal, have intelligence and so on, but if they don't have clarity, clarity is the key. So having spiritual fortitude and understanding what you're fighting for, understanding what you believe in, is the first most important step to dispel any darkness. And then, when you deal with fear, you deal with confusion and helplessness, what's the counterforce to that? Is confidence, clarity, belief in what you're doing. I mentioned the expression a number of times, Hasidic expression, when you're tied above, you don't fall below. What does that mean? That when life is filled with slippery slopes. We have many pits, many what's the word I want to use? Many stumbling blocks that are in our way. We don't know when the next curveball would come. But what distinguishes, for example, between a good swimmer and an average or bad swimmer? What distinguishes between a powerful tree and a weak tree? Between a powerful ship and a weak ship? So a good swimmer doesn't mean that they can swim under all circumstances. When the tide is not going their way, or when there's a powerful storm, a good swimmer knows not to fight it. A good swimmer knows how to navigate. That's the key. It's not that he's more powerful, he knows how to navigate. An amateur will fight the tide and get so weak it'll destroy it. The difference in a strong tree and a weak tree is not when the storm strikes. That's when you test it. It's before the storm strikes. The strong tree has deep roots, so when a storm strikes, the tree will not fall. Same thing with a strong ship. So what is the counterforce to all the fears? Well, we have many fears, all the uncertainties. The confusion is to have strong roots, to be tied above. I know, well, roots go down below, but it could be both ways. To be tied above. It means that you're connected to something that's more powerful than you, and that's why the Maccabees were able to vanquish and conquer even those that were superior to them, because they believed in something. So that is the key to any darkness, whether it's psychological darkness of our own personal weaknesses, depression, anxiety, distress, despair. All that is, the counterforce for that is having strong foundational roots, being tied above, something that you connect to, which keeps you afloat in times when there is need for it. This includes having friends, having family, and of course having those beliefs. This is why Jews were able to survive everything, because they went with their belief system. Viktor Frankl recognized that in developing logotherapy, Man in Search of Meaning. He saw those with meaning were able to get through the most difficult experiences, even though they didn't suffer less than others did, but they had extra tools at their disposal. You see it every time, God forbid, someone's in a hospital. Look at 2 beds right near each other. One patient is receiving many guests, gifts, people come tell stories, they smile, and the other person is lying alone in a bed without family, without friends, without anyone's support. They're suffering, let's say, from exactly the same illness. I'd go even further. Let's say the single person, the solitary person, has a smaller illness than the other one. What do you think will be the likelihood that one will survive, one will not? When you have those friends, they give you that encouragement. You want to fight. You have reason to fight. Doctors will tell you the immune system is strengthened when a person has optimism, when a person feels that they have something to live for. Whereas someone else may have a far lesser illness, but when there's no one coming to visit, and there's nothing to look forward to. So basically your despair weakens you, and why would someone fight on? And there's no question the immune system is weakened, and as a result, will definitely cause the illness to fester. Now obviously it's not only that, there's also obviously medical and the actual level of illness is of course a factor, but don't ever underestimate this power. We don't even know, till this day, people and doctors don't know the power of when someone wants to fight for something and they believe in something. O. Henry captured it so well in that story where the guy was on his deathbed, right? And he had nothing but to look out the window. He had a tree. It was in the summer. In the summer, the tree was, of course, a fully bloomed tree, and with all the leaves. But as autumn came, and the leaves began to fall from the tree, so you know how people get fixated on images when they can't do anything else? He fixated on the tree, and in his mind, he became the tree. As the leaves fell from the tree, he felt his energy was waning and being sapped. And in his mind, when the last leaf will fall, that will be the day he dies. And I don't remember the exact details, but someone comes and paints a leaf. So even when all the leaves fell, there was a painted leaf on the window. So he thought the leaf was still there, and that gave him, so to speak, that confidence, because he kept his whole life was hanging on that leaf. There was no leaf, but he thought there was a leaf. And it's a very apt story. It's a very accurate story. Again, we can't, certain things, God forbid, are beyond our control. But we're talking about what is in our control. And that's why you'll find throughout Jewish history, those Jews, they had a certain strength of character, presence, even in difficult times, and that gave them the ability to get through anything. And I can go on. There are more lessons of Hanukkah. We light Hanukkah menorah specifically at dusk when the sun sets to teach us this lesson. So when you think of what's going on today, the challenges, the massacres, the deaths, and the general climate is a cloud hanging over, what was it, the way Engels and Marx started their Communist Manifesto, that there's what's the expression there? There's a specter hangs over Europe. There's a specter hanging over the world today. There's no question about it. It's a very serious cloud. Thank God it's not taking millions of lives. We're not talking about a world war like World War I or World War II. But make no mistake, it's absolutely a world war because you're dealing with a civilization. You're dealing with a civilization of 1.8 billion people are Muslims. Again, I do not believe that most of them are killers and most of them are murderers, but that is where this is coming from. And just as I don't believe that every Christian in the 16th century was part of the Inquisition or part of the pogroms or part of the Crusades. However, it is a religious battle that's being waged, and we are really not ready for it. The Enlightenment, the French Enlightenment convinced us 200 years ago that religion would no longer be a force by now, and many people still think it's not, but it actually is, because God remains strong. The Muslim world grows. Christianity is 2.5 billion. You're talking about serious numbers here. We're not talking about a few. We happen to just be 14 million Jews, and we make more trouble for our numbers than anybody. I mean that in a good way. We dominate the headlines. But Jews have to be leaders who teach this message. And as I said, Hanukkah captures it so well. You see Hanukkah as understanding what the battle really is. It's not the war, it's a light. It's about light and darkness. So, on a happy note, I have no doubt that either leaders will rise, or a leader will rise, or the grassroots will be wise enough and create a ripple effect. Because if we share this clarity with each other and with others, today with the viral power of the internet, it doesn't matter, may not matter whether a leader understands it, as long as you have millions of people thinking a certain way. So I think we have a responsibility to share these ideas with each other and really get it out there. And today, no one can stop you from getting a message out. So I'm going to do my part to get this message out as much as I can, because I really think we are in historical times. I, for one, do not want my children and grandchildren to come and say, so what did you guys do when you were in 2015 and 2016 when these battles began raging? Because they're not going away. That's clear. I don't think there's even a fool recognizes that it's not going away, because nothing has changed. Why suddenly will it go away? It's not, we could have wishful thinking and say it's all over, that they vented, like some people like to say, they were frustrated, they vented, and now it's all over. But it's not that way. It only seems to be getting worse and more prevalent. And, I think about it, like someone said to me, so what do you think happened after September 11th? I said, the only thing I see that changed is we have to take off our shoes in airports unless you're pre-TSA. That's one of the so-called significant changes that changed since 2011. Now, thank God that this government has protected the country and we've not had another attack like that. But something? No one believes that it's not possible. Now, we believe in al tiftach peh, best not to talk. But some things have to be said. And so we have a responsibility, and I, as I said, for one, do not want to go down saying that we were quiet and just acquiesced or said, you're right, we're all confused, well, let's go watch football, and so on. I remember I was in the studio in MSNBC, MSNBC after September 11th. So if you remember, So there was all this, there were the vigils and not the vigils, the prayer services. I think on Friday was called the Day of Prayer, National Day of Prayer, for those that were killed in the World Trade Center, in the Pentagon, and so on. And I remember I was asked to be a commentator as the different services were going on. Okay. Interestingly, Mark McGuire, who you may know, a slugger for the St. Louis Cardinals. Mark McGuire was a home run slugger, a real. If you looked at him, saw like a real hunk. You didn't think he had anything between his ears except muscle. And he was interviewed, and they asked him, because if you remember during those few days, that baseball season, the baseball games were suspended, which was the first time, I think, in a century. Because even during World War II, FDR, they decided that baseball should go on because it kept the morale of the country going. But after September 11th, baseball, there was no games for that week. So one of the interviewers asked him, so Mr. McGuire, when do you think America is going to go back to reality and start playing baseball again? And he said something like this, to this effect. He says, that's the problem we have. We decided that a game is reality, that baseball is reality. He says, this is reality, life and death. People died. We want to go back. Our reality is back to Hollywood, back to our soap operas, back to our shopping and Jerry Springer or whatever else is going on in high-level TV through the mornings or afternoons. I don't know if you ever see this stuff, and everyone thinks that's normal. This is reality. Now, I was glad to hear it from a person like him, because that's very true. Now, that doesn't mean, thank God we are blessed and we have the leisure, as I said, and the luxury to spend and waste time all day on nonsense and so on. And I'm not taking away the beauty of sports, and people love it, and et cetera, et cetera. And then when people want a dose of reality, they give you reality TV, and they say, now you have reality. It's like someone will say, you're just watching TV. I'm watching reality TV. What do you think about that? Well, Walter Matthau said, this is authentic imitation leather. That's what he said. It's authentic imitation leather. I don't drink false Coke, Diet Coke. I drink the real Coke, as if Coke is real, That's the delusion we live in. Reality, my friends, is what happens between you and your heart, the people you love. Reality is where there's pain in your life. Reality is you and your children and your family. It's the beliefs that you carry, the values you pass on. We live in a comfortable world where we can replace all that with temporary indulgences and instant gratification and a game here and a game there. And it's actually a tribute to a comfortable life. But comforts can create major delusions. If we had no enemy and everything was peaceful, messianic times, fine. It's also quite pathetic that people are involved in such temporary games. But at least there's no danger. Now there is a danger. And what's happening now is a wake-up call to understand what we stand for and our values. Not a wake-up call to say, let's be terrified there's an enemy out to get us. No, a wake-up call. What do you stand for? Maybe this is historic times. So as I said, I don't want to go down and one day say, I said nothing. Because to me it's as clear as day that we're dealing with a serious battle, which frankly is a positive thing from my end. Why? Because it forces us to stand up. What do you believe in? If you were to stand right now and say, which line will you stand in? What do you believe in? What are you ready to fight for? You want to have an answer that comes from a very profound inner place. And I think Hanukkah can help us access that power of soul that really is what's the word I want? Indestructible. And that has the power to survive and deal with any darkness, because it's a light that cannot be vanquished. So God bless us all this Hanukkah. Happy Hanukkah to everybody. To take this light of this holiday, as the Ramban writes, Nachmanides writes, that even the menorah in the temple ultimately was extinguished tragically when the Romans destroyed the temple. But Haneres Halalu, these flames of Hanukkah, burn on, Einam B'Teilin Le'elam, burn on. They're the only flames in Jewish history that came out of darkness, came after the desecration of the temple, and they found that oil, as I mentioned. And these flames burn on forever, burn on forever, even through the darkness. We have stories during the Holocaust where Jews tried to scratch together a little motor oil to light a flame. We light flames till this day, even though the temple no longer is standing now, and the menorah is not being lit in the temple, but we light these menorahs in our homes, in our synagogues, in our hearts. So each of us should be walking menorahs and bring light to wherever you go, because that's the power of light. Fire and water are enemies. Enough fire can evaporate large bodies of water. Enough water can extinguish great fires. Light and darkness are not enemies. A little light dispels darkness. Darkness is the absence of light. So you could have a very dark room. You bring a little light, there's no battle. The light automatically moves away and dispelled in the face of light. Obviously, if it's a very dark room, you need more light. But darkness is not a challenge for light, just like confusion cannot withstand clarity. The best way to keep somebody in the dark is by keeping them confused. As soon as they know something, this is why fascist governments always made sure you shouldn't know. They control the press, they control the airwaves. Knowledge gives you light. If you don't know there's another option, you can convince yourself, okay, this is where I am, like I said with the elephant. You've convinced this is your only option, there's no way out. So maybe use the lessons of Hanukkah to build that strength, that fortitude, which has the power to repel any type of fear, insecurity, and especially in our times where we need it more than ever, this type of war, the war of light over darkness. God bless everyone. We should have peace, only peace here in this country, in Israel, of course, everywhere in the world. And we should finally wake up to the facts that we need to wake up to. And hopefully the right leaders will emerge and do the same. So everyone have a happy Hanukkah and stay in touch, please. Good to see you. After all this time, I'm mentioning to you. I'm talking to you. And good to see all of you and everyone outside cyberspace that you see me and I don't see you, but see this as a greeting to each of you out there, illuminating and empowering Hanukkah for all. Be well till next week on Wednesday. Thank you very much. Okay, thank you. Illuminating, enlightening.